Good morning, everybody. Today's class is about endocrine system, which encompasses the various endocrine glands, which are ductless glands, which are scattered throughout the body. They are connected to each other and to the rest of the body throughout the vascular system. The chemicals secreted by the endocrine glands are called hormones. The endocrine glands are referred to as ductless glands since they pour the secretion directly into without the help of ducts. So human body is composed of functionally specialized cells and tissues. As you all know, the two drivers of the body are the endocrine system and the nervous system. Nervous system, the action is very rapid, where it's a slow and steady action. The normal function depends on these components working together, very coordinated way. The coordination is achieved by communication systems, the endocrine system, nervous system, and all communication systems. They use chemical signals. Nervous system also use electrical signals. Here in endocrine system, the chemical signals are through hormones. They work together, not in isolation. So a hormone is a chemical substance secreted by the endocrine gland directly into the bloodstream. It regulates the function of distant organ called as the target organs. So there are different endocrine glands. So the pineal gland which secrete melatonin, the thyroid which secrete T3, T4, the parathyroid which secrete parathormone, the vitamin D. Then we have the pancreas secreting insulin, glucagon, the adrenal cortex which secretes glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and the adrenal medulla secretes the various catecholamines which are adrenaline and noradrenaline with the reproductive system which secrete estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So these are, how do they control? These hormones, they control the growth, development and reproduction. They maintain the homeostasis by nutrient and electrolyte balance. They respond to external stimuli, mainly the stress and trauma. It's a complex control processes. Many processes are controlled by several hormones. Many hormones have several effects. Failure in these control systems can occur, producing clinical problems. If there is decreased insulin sensitivity, it results in diabetes, and it can be in thyroid disease, can be hypo and hyperthyroidism. Increased cortisol can result in Cushing syndrome, and decrease can result in Addison's disease, and the hormonal imbalance in females can result in infertility and sterility. So normally the chemistry, the hormones are, they can be polypeptides or protein hormone. The examples are parathormone, hormones of pituitary, the gastrointestinal hormone. They are water-soluble hormones and are carried in unbound form in the plasma. They are made up of chains of amino acids linked by peptide bonds. They are synthesized by the rough endoplasmic reticulum. So anterior pituitary, the posterior pituitary, insulin, glucagon, all parathormone, all are polypeptides. The amino acid derivatives are the hormones of adrenal medulla and thyroid hormone. These are amines. They are derivative of amino acid tyrosine. They are synthesized in the cell cytoplasm. They are mainly the thyroid and the adrenal medulla hormones. The thyroid hormones are thyroxine and triiodothyronine. The adrenal medullary hormones are epinephrine and norepinephrine. The steroid hormones are synthesized from cholesterol. They have cyclopentanoperhydrophenanthrene ring, and they are formed from smooth endoplasmic reticulum. They are mainly the adrenal cortical hormones, so the glucocorticoids, and the gonadal hormones, which are the estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So the polypeptide and protein hormones, most of the hormones in the body, 100 or more amino acids are proteins, When peptides are less than 100 amino acids, they are synthesized in the rough endoplasmic reticulum as pre-prohormones, converted, cleaved into prohormones, transferred to Golgi apparatus and through the secretory vehicles. And the hormones have an enzymatic fusion with the membrane and they are thrown out through the process of exocytosis. These are all water soluble hormones, each reaching the target tissue by circulatory system. The amino hormones are derivatives from thyrosin. They are synthesized and stored in the follicles of the thyroid gland as thyroglobulin. The free hormone to the blood and bind with plasma proteins. The adrenal medullary hormones are stored in vesicles and they are exocytized in the blood as free hormone. And the examples you came to know the amino hormones are the thyroid and the adrenal medullary. The steroids, they are synthesized from cholesterol. They are not stored but possibly have quick utilization from cholesterol in the blood. They are lipid soluble, diffuse across the cell membrane, interstitial fluid and blood. The hormones are released either by reflex release or cyclical variation. The cyclical variation is influenced by seasonal changes, stages of development and aging, or circadian cycle and sleep. The somatostatic hormone, growth hormone, is increased during development, during early period of sleep, and decreased during later stages of sleep. The gonadal hormones are increased during development and decreased during aging, and there are seasonal changes, and there are also lunar cycles. The menstrual cycle, for example, we have the menstrual phase, the proliferative, the ovulatory and secretory phase. The adrenocorticotropin and glucocorticoids have circadian rhythm. They secrete in the morning hours, 4 o'clock to 8 a.m. There are reflex release influenced by stress and situation. The stress hormones are mainly the corticones, renin-angiotensin, aldosterone and prolactin. The hormones are transported either some are water soluble and others are lipid soluble. The peptide and catecholamines are dissolved in the plasma. They diffuse from capillaries into the interstitial fluid and to the target cells. Steroid hormones are lipid soluble. They circulate in the blood and mainly bound to plasma proteins less than 10% of free form. Thyroxine are more than 99% bound to plasma. Hormones bound to proteins are biologically inactive. They act as reservoir until they dissociate from plasma protein. It can be cortisol binding globulin. So the mechanism of action is the hormones act by binding to the receptor on the target cells. The magnitude of the response depends on the concentration of active hormone at our target tissue, receptor number, which can be upregulated and downregulated, and depends on the affinity of the receptor for hormone and degree of signal amplification. So the response depends on concentration, the number of receptors, affinity of receptors for the hormone, and the way in which the enzymes are involved in enhancing the degree of signal amplification. The hormone receptors are mostly located on the surface of the membrane, the protein, peptide, catecholamines, all. In the cell cytoplasm, we have the steroid hormones, the receptors. So steroid hormones bind to cytoplasmic receptors, whereas thyroid hormones bind to nuclear receptors. Hormone receptors, large number, they are modified proteins having specific binding sites for respective hormone. The receptors are present on surface or inside the cell, which can be nucleus or cytoplasm. Each cell has 2000 to 1 lakh receptors. The receptors are usually highly specific for single hormone. The number of receptors does not remain constant from day to day, even minute to minute. It keeps on changing. The receptors are inactivated or destroyed, that is downregulation, or reactivated or produce new ones, which is upregulation. So if you take most of the hormones, the mechanism of action for the protein hormones and catecholamines are they combine the receptors on the cell membrane. The steroid hormone, as they are lipid soluble, enter the cell and bind to cytoplasmic receptor, forming hormone receptor complex, and thereby they initiate all the cascade of actions. The third hormone penetrate the cell and they enter the nucleus. They bind to the nuclear receptors and thereby initiate the actions. They are secreted. Hormone secretion and control prevents overactivity of the hormone system. The control variable is often not the secretory rate of the hormone itself, but the degree of activity of the target tissue. So we have to know the activity of the target gland. Most of the hormone secretion are regulated, controlled by negative feedback mechanism, except oxytocin, which is controlled by positive feedback mechanism. The feedback regulation of hormones can occur at all levels, including gene transcription and translation, and the steps involved in processing the hormone and releasing the stored hormone. There is an HPA axis, which is the hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis, which causes the negative feedback. So most of the actions are by negative feedback mechanism. Positive feedback is a few instances which occurs when the biological action of the hormone causes additional secretion. Secretion of LH based on the stimulatory effect of estrogen before ovulation is one hormone. LH stimulates ovaries to produce more estrogen and it stimulates again the pituitary gland to produce LH. When the LH reaches the appropriate concentration, the negative feedback mechanism. Oxytocin, which enhances the parturition.